두 번째 연사부는 지금 이제 해외에 계신 관계로 저희가 동영상을 준비를 했는데요. 두 번째 동영상으로 저희 발표해 주실 분은 현재 SmartCAE 매니징 디렉터를 맡고 계신 스테판 브라운. 타이틀은 디지털 콜드 체인. Learn how this makes the cold chain transparent, less risky, and more cost efficient and greener. 라는 주제로 한 26분 정도 동영상을 지금부터 방송을 하겠습니다.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stefan Braun. I'm the Managing Director and founder of SmartCAE, and it's a pleasure for me to be on this year's CoPast as a speaker. So my topic I want to show you a little bit today is digital cold chain. Learn how this makes the cold chain transparent, less risky, more cost-effective, and greener. So that's a little bit my topic for today. And first of all, only a few words. Who is SmartCAE? We were founded in 2002, and since 2014, we work on temperature-controlled logistics, and we built a virtual cold chain where we can connect all the different stakeholders on one platform and allow them to get transparency in their cold chain. And we have customers currently in 25 countries around the world. We work with 12 of top 30 pharma companies and with most of the global relevant packaging companies around the world. So now let's a little bit at the agenda for today. So I will give you a little bit an overview about digital twin in cold chain, then a little bit an overview about the digital cold chain by itself. And then I will show you some what-if examples, how you can use a digital cold chain. So first I will give you an example about what happens in extreme weather conditions, what happens if something goes wrong in your supply chain, then also how you find the right box to minimal total costs. And at the end of the day, we look also closer at the CO2 fingerprint and costs again to get this both together, the costs, the compliance, and the CO2. So first of all, what is the digital twin for in the area of cold chain? So if you look at the general definition, like from companies like Gartner, you see a digital twin is a representation of a real-world entity or system, and this tries to mimic what happens in the real world. And this digital twin allows you to play around. So you can use the link here. You can find a little bit where the history of digital twin comes from. So you see it starts quite early in the 1960s, where it's also related to the moon mission, and it have evolved over the time. And now we use digital twins for a lot of topics. So I will go a little bit in the area of cold chain or supply chain, and show a little bit how the digital twin in this area will help. So, but it's also interesting to get a feeling where digital twins are standing. And this has changed a lot in the last around 2.5 years. So you see digital twins were in the range of a few years to coming to really to practical impact. But the last 2 years or 2.5 years or 3 years, however you define it, have changed a lot, because often a digital approach was the only way to determine really what happens in the supply chain, because we saw all this disruption in the supply chain, and people rely really on a digital twin approach, and for the treatment of the vaccine, and for the COVID, and now we can see also it's still there. So and if it works for your COVID treatment, you can also apply it for other things like aspirin or some not so high critical products, but it shortened all the whole process. So why is there a need for a digital twin in cold chain? So there are a lot of reasons why we need a digital twin in cold chain. So the first reason is not all parameters are exactly known. You know, like when our box is sitting on the tarmac in the sun, we don't know exactly how long it will stay. We can also not test really real world product maybe, because if we have a new drug and this is a clinical trial, we cannot try out this new drug because it's impossible to do this. We can also use it not for unplanned things, and because we have situations like the Suez Canal was closed. We had disruptions with closed ports, And this is the nice thing in the digital world. You can play with the unplanned things. And also, you know, testing of passes boxes is a very time-consuming business. It can take weeks of chamber time. And testing is also not always realistic. If you test against a, let's say, a specific profile like ISTA or whatever, but you ship it from India to Australia or from Korea to Australia. So all these are totally different as the typical test scenarios. At the end of the day, we also have to look at cost versus risk, because, you know, it's important to figure out how green we can do things or how much protection we need. So like a VIP box versus a cardboard box. So this helps us a lot when we have a digital twin and we can play with these scenarios. And there's also a need for a digital twin because sometimes, you know, real world shows confusion. So when you look how many test shipments people are doing to qualify a box for a lane, you see, this is a result. I made a LinkedIn poll. I have around 6,000 followers on LinkedIn. And you see around 56% make free shipments. That's okay. But what happens is in reality, if you get the result of these free shipments, 60% report then, in my second question, my risk is still unclear. So I think this is where you see you can make some real tests, but do you get really everything out? Maybe not. And also what is also an interesting thing to know, when I made an other LinkedIn poll, when you use computer simulation in qualifying the packaging, how people trust in this. An interesting scenario is only 36% reported we trust in physical tests first. So and this is an interesting scenario because this means if we compare it to other industries, we would have no driving cars, no flying planes. But we see also in the cold chain area or the supply chain area, digital twins are still starting. It's not so established like in other industries. So now what is the idea of a virtual cold chain as a digital twin for your supply chain? First of all, we try to connect the different stakeholders. So we have the packaging companies, the packaging providers, we have the pharma companies, which have some information about the product, we have the logistics companies, which have some information about the lane. And now we can match this together because we want to quantify at the end of the day, the risk of having temperature excursions. So, and when we have the understanding of the risk, we can also find out what is the right packaging we need on a lane, or what is also the right service on a lane. And we can also mix it up and say, okay, what is the best combination of both worlds together? So, and the virtual cold chain is in principle different elements. So one part is, we call it the virtual box, where we have the information of our packaging system. Then we have the virtual lane, which mimics our supply chain environment, like the ambient conditions. And if you have then a virtual box and a virtual lane, we can run this all together. So this means we get understanding how much risk we have. So first of all, let's look at the virtual box. What is the idea of a virtual box? So we see here a little bit of an overview, very, very short. What is a virtual box? So you see all the main elements. You can put in cool packs, you can put in virtual loggers, you can put in all the parameters, like the parameters of your coolant, the thermal properties. And then you can run this and see what happens in reality with all the different scalings. We have the product in, maybe it's a vial or the syringe, and we can also scale it up and say, okay, it's a pellet and pellets in a reefer container to make it as realistic as possible. An interesting question is always, how close is this to reality? So this is what you see here is a test of a blanket around a pellet where the sun is shining on this. And you see now these 3 points here where our loggers are sitting. And now we have the sun here, the measured sun, it was done in Florida. And we have now compared the simulation and the measurement. And we see the red is our simulation, the blue is the measurement. And we see that's quite close. So these are 3 different positions in our palette. You see here, these are the 3 positions. So we have one on the top, one on the side, one on the top in the middle. And we see all matches quite well. So, but the only thing is, in reality, you have to wait 3 days and wait for a sunny day. In the virtual world, you can do it immediately on your laptop and see how it will perform. So now we have a box. The next is we need a lane. For the lane, you have different options. In the synthetic world, would say we use some ISTA profiles or some worst case profiles or whatever we have. So, but the best you can do really is use your logger data if you have ambient conditions of the logger. But in lots of cases, you have no ambient conditions about the shipment because it's maybe a new lane or you have not really a lot of realistic data. And for this, it's better to use historical weather data. Or you can also use the weather forecast if you have this also. So now how we do this? So we access all the weather points here, the weather stations of the world. And with this, we are able now to specify a lane. So you see here, a simple one from Germany over Atlanta to Chicago. And we have the different timestamps. And we see here, this is ambient conditions. This is controlled conditions. We have here some sun. And then we can select also the weather station, what you want to use. So now we can also specify when we start in the supply chain. And then we can download all the lane data from the last, let's say, couple of years. We see here all gray lines are 1 day. And we have around 1,500 of days. And then we can use this to generate a hot and a cold profile, maybe for a test. Or we can use later all the gray ones for a simulation. So we can also use the weather forecast if you want to know what happens tomorrow. But now we have a box, we have a lane. Now we want to quantify the risk and the total cost at the end of the day. How we do this? We do it relatively pragmatically. We use all the boxes, use all the lanes, run these scenarios, and know exactly how often we will pass and fail. We don't use any risk scoring, because risk scoring is always related to the ambient conditions. They are a warm lane is high risk, a cold lane is high risk, but it's not reflecting the effect of packaging. And a warm lane could be a high risk if you have the wrong packaging for a warm lane. So, and with the simulation, we know how many excursions we get depending on the temperature range, like here, the green one, 2 to 8. And we have now here exactly the number of excursions for these 865 shipments, and then we can specify a fail rate of this. So if we have this, we can also look at the total loss costs. For this, we have first the cost for packaging, the cost for shipment. We can do also this in an Excel spreadsheet, but cost for compliance are directly related to excursions. So each excursion costs you some money, and if the excursion is too extreme, we have maybe a product loss if we out of stability of our product data. And with this equation, we can specify the total cost of ownership for a shipment. And then we can use this to optimize our system. So, and we have in principle 2 types of lane risk assessment. So first is we use historical ones. Second is we use predictive. For the historical one, we apply historical data on a shipping system. And with this information, we can run all the different scenarios, and then we know how often we will pass, how often we will fail. The reason for this, like here, is it too cold? Is it hot, or is it hot and too cold? And then we can use this to mitigate the risk. So this means we can use maybe the right box, or we can use combination of boxes to make the risk as low as possible. If you use a predictive lane risk, it looks a little different, because typically we use the weather forecast for the next couple of days, and then we can get information back and say, oh, and which days we can ship, and which days we cannot ship, and on which hour we run into trouble if our lane starts with this. So, and also what we're also interested in is the CO2 fingerprint of our shipping system. So for this, we have different options. We can look on the packaging level, only what comes from the material. We can look on the route, which is also important, and we can also look on the power grid. We can use on is it usable or not. So these are the typical options what we have. So now let's look a little bit more on some example cases. And I call it here the what ifs, because at the end of the day, we always look at what ifs. You know, we have all these different typical questions. So what you see here, what if I see in my test shipments no excursions? Is there no risk? What is the cost of no risk? What do box parameter tolerances mean for your product? What happens if there are extreme weather conditions? What happens if a flight is delayed or missed? What happens if my warehouse or truck or is not temperature controlled? What happens if my active container is unplugged? What happens on different lanes with different tarmac times? What happens with my dry ice box in the supply chain? So you know a lot of these different things we always see, and we have much more. That's only a small part of this. And I will show you some small examples which will address these topics. So first is a typical question is, what happens if we have extreme weather conditions? And extreme weather conditions is something what can make us really trouble if we have not planned it in, or if maybe our planning is not good enough. I have here an example. I ship here from Rome over Amsterdam to New Delhi, and you see here all my timestamps here on this lane with all the loading, unloading, and the tarmac time. And when we have this, we can look now for the ambient conditions. And we look here for the data from May 2012 until May 2021, and see with this data what happens with our packaging system. And we have also some data of our product, 228. We have some stability data of the product. And now, if you run this, we see, we have 3 solutions here which do the job quite perfect. Everything's 100%, no excursion, no risk, perfect. But what happens last year? We had a heat wave in India. It was around in April, May, and this was some extreme weathers. You see here, this is the map of India. It comes from the European Commission, and we see quite a lot of differences here. And if you look at some weather forecasts at the specific days, we saw now with our free shipping systems, there's one shipping system here which shows on 2 days a problem, because there was the weather too hot because it's warmer as planned. And we see now this is the ambient condition always, and this is the product here, and we see ambient was higher as planned, and we see now our product goes out of temperature range. So that's a problem for our product here. So, but if we see here the weather forecast, you can also look and say, okay, we maybe ship it a day later or a day earlier, and we are still fine. That's maybe an outcome of this. But also, if we have these situations, it also can happen that something goes wrong in the supply chain. Maybe we miss a flight, or our flight is delayed, and maybe we have not the right warehouse or truck. So we use now the same scenario and say, okay, that is now our supply chain, and we have the problem. Maybe our flight is delayed, and if the flight is delayed, we have a 24-hour stop, maybe in Amsterdam for storage. And the question is, should we have an ambient storage or a 5-degree storage? So we want to figure out with the simulation what means this for us. So we have here our lane, and we have the first. We have the ambient storage. We see the ambient storage in Amsterdam. The second here is we have 5-degree storage here. And if you do this, we see an interesting scenario. If we use the ambient storage, all the different shipping systems show some trouble in the worst case. And we see here the percentage of fails. What happens now if we put them in a 5-degree warehouse? We see now, the VIP box now do the job perfectly. The others shows interesting scenarios. The summer light box is going too cold and too hot. And the summer new box, which includes some ice packs, goes too cold, because we have a box which works good on warm conditions, and we put this in a 5-degree warehouse, in principle, in a winter situation. And then we can see here it's going too cold. But also, this is an interesting scenario then, where we want to figure out what is the right box to minimize the total cost at the end of the day. So it's a little bit the same scenario. We have Rome, Amsterdam, New Delhi. We have our product is 228. We have some stability data, the same like before. We have some different boxes, and we specify again our lane here. And we know all freight rates are totally different. And this is a little bit the history of freight rates from some period of time. And we see it's different from the lane, it's different from the period. And this is also something what is important to take into account. And for this, we can also put in our cost panel here in the cost for the shipping system. Then we have the mass of the product, which relates to the transport costs, which we have here. Then we have cost for an excursion. When we have an excursion, it costs us some money, because we have to report it, we have to write some paperwork, and this is something what the could be really costly. And if something goes really wrong, maybe we lose our product. That's the most costly. And we have also here the number of shipments by months. And if we use this, we see first on the top level the number of excursions. And we see here some boxes are do the job quite well. Some boxes are show some problems. Here, this box have a problem from May to July. But we see also with this picture here, maybe some combinations can make sense. And we see here the exact percentage. We can also go a deep dive in. But now we can also here, that's the most complicated table I have in my presentation here, but it's not so complicated. It looks like we have the cost for the packaging, we have the cost for the transport, cost for excursions, cost for product loss, and then we get here out the total costs by shipment. And with this, we can figure out what is the best choice in a single solution way, but with the system, we can also find out what are the costs for the best combination. And we see now there's a lot of saving in if we use also combinations by months. And we see here we can do it with two type of packaging, the Summer Light box and the Pew box. And we save around $600,000 by 6,400 shipments, so around $100 by shipment. But we can also look at the closer at the CO2 fingerprint, because if you have now the costs, we have also now the compliance. We can also look and say, okay, which of these different boxes works for us under CO2 footprint aspects. So first of all, again, we have our lane. We have now, depending on the type of the boxes, we have a CO2 fingerprint for the production of the boxes. So we see here that's the Summer Light box, the Summer box, we have the Summer PU box, we have a single VIP shipper, and we have the VIP shipper when we use it 100 times. So that's the CO2 fingerprint by box. So what it needs to produce the boxes. And we also have the price, what we have to pay maybe for a certificate of the CO2. So now we can also look, what is the cost of CO2 per box on the lane? So we see now that's the CO2 price on this lane by box. We can put on top. So if we now look and the number of shipments, that's the total CO2 fingerprint of all the boxes on the lane. And you see that's all the boxes. And we have not looked in which are compliant or not. But when we remember back from the results before, you can look now in first which boxes are compliant, single usable boxes. So we have one box for the whole year. And we have now here 3 options. We have the VIP single shipper. We have the same, but we bring it back by air. And we bring it here back by ocean, only to have a different transport mode back. So, but now, when you compare now, and we compare this now with the solutions which also work on combinations, what we have before, we see there are some combinations which do the job as well. So we have the PU Summer Light box, we have the VIP single and the Summer Light box combination, and we have the VIP box and the VIP box when you bring it back by air. So, and now we can also look in what means this in total costs. So you see here, that's my reference is the PU Summer Light box, and that's the extra costs what we have for the different combinations. So we see, okay, the PU Summer Light box was the cheapest one. Okay, this is what we found before. But we can also now put on top the price of CO2, which comes on top when we have transport this in the lane. And we see now a little bit of a change, because before the VIP box was more expensive than the reusable bag. But if we put the CO2 costs on top, we see now the reuse one with VIP is a little more cost effective and costly, because we have to transport it back, which generates CO2 and makes the price higher. But I think at the end of the day, we come to this result, because this shows us the extra gain of CO2 we have for the different options. So first, we have here, that's always related to 0, that's the PU Summer Light, and that's the difference in the percentage. And we see now the second one, the VIP single and Summer Light box, is around 60% more CO2 than the best combination. And if you take the VIP box, we are more than 125%. And the reusable, it's a little bit smaller from the CO2 gain. But we see that's some, let's say, low-hanging fruits. If we get a better understanding which boxes are compliant and cost-effective, we can use the CO2 fingerprint at the end of the day to determine, okay, which is really the box we should use to fulfill these three topics: compliant, cost-effective, and green. And my key takeaways I want to give you at the end is a little bit. So we have a digital twin for temperature control logistics, and this allows us to play with all the what ifs. It helps us also to reduce temperature excursions and look at the total costs and try to minimize this, and gives us also a good methodology to make the CO2 carbon footprint transparent. So this helps us to bring these together, because in pharma shipments is always compliant first, because it brings us nothing if we have everything built cost effective and green, but we are not compliant. So we have to look first on compliance, and then we have to figure out how can we make it cost effective and green. So that's a little bit my key takeaway I want to give you, and I hope you have maybe some questions for me, and you get some ideas out of my talk. And I wish you a good rest of the conference, and maybe see you again at some other conference in the real world. Thank you very much for your time, and yeah, have a good day. Thank you.
네, 요 화면 멈춰주시면 될 것 같습니다. 좀 전에 직전 화면 방금 나왔던 화면 중에 시간을 정확하게 해주셔서 네네.
Out of my talk.
네네. 오늘 저희 여기서 해야 되죠. 연사님께서 말씀해주셨던 내용이 여기 정리가 되어 있는 것 같습니다. 네. 마지막에 이제 하신 말씀처럼 그 Q&A를 받을 수 있는 상황이 아니기 때문에 정말 궁금하신 부분이나 그런 부분은 뭐 다음에 컨퍼런스나 또 뭐 이메일을 통해서 질의를 하시면 될 것 같고요. 뭐 제가 또 제 분야가 아니기 때문에 제가 정리할 수 있는 내용은 아닌 것 같고, 지금 한 약 26분 동안 시간 동안 한 번도 쉬지 않고 목이 찢어지는 육성을 만들어 가시면서 26분 동안 계속 요 내용에 관해서 열변을 하셨습니다. 주로 이제 템퍼러처 컨트롤 관련된 내용이 주된 내용이 아니었나 싶어요. 그 디스털팅과 연결해서 다양한 레인과 박스 타입 유형에 따라서 다양한 케이스에 말씀해 주셨고, CO2나 그리고 토탈 코스트 부분, 미니마이즈 더 토탈 코스트 부분도 구체적으로 또 다양한 사례에 대해서 말씀을 해주셨던 것 같습니다. 네, 멀리 계시지만 박수로 감사의 인사를 전해드리도록 하겠습니다.